What is up, fellas, and welcome to another episode of Rewriting History with me, the Goob. I've got an exciting episode for you today, fellas. Sorry for the late start, but we've got some good content for you. I'm going to be talking about geopolymer, ancient tunnels, all kinds of very interesting stuff, and all backed up with legitimate scientific research that most of you have probably never heard of unless you did your homework and you watched that Ancient Architects video. Before I get into the actual content, I want to make a little prognostication for 2025 because I have been very black-pilling, talking about NAGPRA and the death of archaeology and the abysmal state of everything. And it's a pretty dark and black-pilling thing to talk about. But I am very bullish for 2025 for archaeology. I think that 2025 is going to hold very good and very big things. And it's entirely because of people like Wandering Wolf, Karoli Poca, Weird Old World, and so many others. When the Flint Dibble debate happened on Joe Rogan, I declared archaeology was dead. And I also had a dream that went along with that amateurs would realize that they didn't have to operate in this broken system. They didn't have to deal with these experts, and that they could do it themselves. And I thought this was a pipe dream. I thought this was something that maybe in the future one day would happen. But it's already a reality. There are already so many incredible people doing so much incredible work. There are private LiDAR scans that are happening in South and Central America that are exposing the massive extent of civilization that flourished there, which I've talked about before. And we're just going to keep getting confirmation that all of this is true. It's pretty incredible. So I'm very, very bullish for 2025. So today we are talking about Sacsayhuaman, Sacsayhuaman, and the fact that these giant megalithic blocks are geopolymer. I'm going to be sharing a bit of Ancient Architects video, but I'm trying to pull up some images right now because I want to just give a bit of an overview of the site, give you a little bit of perspective before we actually get into talking about the specifics. So here's some incredible images of Sacsayhuaman. You can see there's multiple levels of these huge megalithic stones. There's people in there for scale. You can see the size of these blocks. They absolutely dwarf the people. And this wall is incredibly long. You're seeing a small little portion of it here. And there's a lot going on at Sacsayhuaman. It's a lot more than just this wall right here. You can see a bit of, you can't even see the edges. It goes further to the right and further to the left. And you can see those people for scale. This is a massive, massive site, right? And up here you have the ruins of some older buildings. These are limestone blocks. We'll get into the specifics of the stone because they're actually not. But up here are andesite blocks. The building is no longer there. Again, just a bit of the scale here. You see how large these walls are. Huge, huge megalithic walls. And this is the ruins. These are the andesite ruins. So limestone over here and then andesite over here. There's nothing left but the foundations. So whoever built this stuff, we don't know what it was. There's a giant tank here that goes 65 feet deep. It is carved into the bedrock. It's been filled in with dirt now, but there's a giant, what's assumed to be water tank. Just some more images of the walls and some of the natural formations right next door. Again, huge, huge site. All right. So now that we've got a little bit of perspective, let's go ahead and listen to some of the things that, Sacsayhuaman. I sure sounds like Sacsayhuaman to me. And this Sacsayhuaman, we're going to be talking about if she's natural or not. And spoiler alert, she is not natural. So let me go ahead and pull up Ancient Architects video here and play a little bit of that for you. So I try and get the right screen up here. Okay, I think this is it. Here we go.
The official view is that each block was cut and shaped by hand using basic tools, until the fit was almost perfect.
And just look at those angles there. Like, very acute little angle, weird jigsaw shapes, but we'll see plenty of that as we go through this.
Shaped by hand using basic tools, until the fit was almost perfect. Then the blocks were rubbed together back and forth, until a perfect joint was formed. But is what we are looking at simply hard labour? Because there are perfect three-dimensional joints on most of the blocks, and on every contact surface.
And that's something that you'll hear a lot of the detractors, a lot of the people who are against like ancient high technology or geopolymer or any of these alternate ideas, they will incessantly try and tell you that these blocks are only flush on the very face. But as ancient architects just told you, that's not true at all. These are perfectly fit across every single surface. And we'll see that. I've got images to demonstrate that. But it's a very common claim you hear that these are only perfect in the front and they're not actually all that impressive. And it's just a lie.
Would have taken a huge amount of time and effort. Now, I have a master's degree in geology, I've seen limestone in the field, and I've seen many objects made from different types of limestone. And well, granted this doesn't sound too scientific, but something about Sacsayhuaman just feels a bit off. Sometimes the rock just doesn't look real, like some kind of hardened grey Play-Doh. The blocks don't look like they've been cut from a quarry and stacked. Something about each block just looks artificial. Why do they bulge out on the main face of the wall, like the weight from above has pushed the stones out? This block seems to bend around a corner, and although of course you can cut a block of stone to this and any shape, is it a mere coincidence that the cracks are located on the bend just here? It's just all very strange.
It is all very strange. And as you just heard Matt say, he is a trained geologist. He is a master's degree in geology. So, you know, I think his opinions are valuable. But sorry, I think I cut him off a few seconds early. Let me play 3 more seconds here.
And these walls all seem somewhat unnatural.
Maybe not. But so the reason that this study was originally done, the study that we're about to be talking about, is because the limestone walls were degrading, right? So the earth itself, what the study found is that both the limestone itself is degrading, it's being eroded away by acid rain and such, and the earth underneath the walls is subsiding. It's sinking, the walls are starting to collapse. And so the idea that these walls are 12,000 years old, it's definitely a stretch for me. We're seeing the degradation actively happening within our lifetimes. This is, you know, we're talking about 100 years or so here. These walls are in danger of collapsing. Like this site probably is not going to be around 500 years in the future, as sad as that is. So yeah, the idea that this is 12,000 years old is a bit of a stretch to me. And one of the points that I don't think I made very clear in my previous episode talking about Peru is that regardless of what lens you look at this through, this poses a major problem for the narratives of archaeology, because we don't lose things. We don't have any lost civilizations. Technology doesn't get lost, all of that, right? So if we look at this through the lens of all of this was done 500 years ago by the Incas, we have no idea how they did any of this. All of that technology, all of that information has been lost. And that's only 500 years ago. And yes, the Spanish can be blamed for destroying a lot of this, but not all of it. They definitely didn't destroy all of this. A lot of this was lost before the Spanish ever even arose. And this was, the Spanish arose right at the collapse of the Inca Empire. Whether they're to blame for it or not is also somewhat debatable. Because it seems like they were already collapsing. We don't know why. This is 500 years ago. We have no idea how these people lived, how they did what they did, why they collapsed. This is very recent. We're not talking about 12,000 years ago. We're talking about 500 years ago, and we have no idea about anything. So whether you think this is a lost civilization and someone else is responsible, or whether you think it's the Inca, archaeology has to face the reality that it has no clue. It has no idea. So, I do think that it's very possible we're looking at multiple different civilizations here and not just the Inca, putting all of this into the perspective of 150 years, because that's how long the Inca were around for. It was a very short-lived civilization. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but I don't think going back to 12,000 years makes a whole lot of sense either. Let me play this next clip here.
Samples were taken from carefully selected places across the site and were looked at in thin section under a microscope. The limestone from the quarry is an organic limestone, and it is made from marine microorganisms, a natural rock where you can clearly see many fossils, just like with many types of limestone. There is no doubt that this is a natural rock.
So just a bit of background information, right? The quarry for Sacsayhuaman has been identified. Oh, I'm not showing the video. Good. The quarry for Sacsayhuaman has been identified, and you didn't miss any good visuals. It was, just pictures of rocks. And it was completely accepted that that was the quarry that these rocks came from. There was no debate on this whatsoever. It was an absolute fact that this was the quarry. As you're about to hear, though, there's some issues with that idea.
But the sample published in the study from Sacsayhuaman is different, in that it is made from 1 to 10 micron calcite crystals, which was confirmed by phase X-ray analysis. There are also veins and lenses that are filled with thicker zones of crystalline calcite. There may be a few traces of fossils, but these have all been recrystallized. But the official report states that traces of natural fossils, microorganisms and microstructures of the limestone are gone. So, in hand specimen, the two rock types do look very similar, but they are very different under a microscope, yet the samples have a near identical composition. Because of this, scientists concluded that the blocks of Sacsayhuaman have to have been made from limestone from the quarry, because the chemical composition is too similar to be a coincidence. But if that's the case, the stone from the quarry has been processed. It's changed from a sedimentary rock to a fine crystalline rock.
Okay, so as you just heard him say, they finally tested the rocks at Sacsayhuaman, and they tested the rocks at the quarry, and they don't match. He's also about to say, or he already said, I'm not 100% sure, that the chemical composition matches. So when they look at the rocks physically, they can tell that they're clearly different rocks. The structure is entirely different. There's no more fossils. There's no more large crystals. It is this very uniform microcrystalline structure. And but the chemical composition of the rocks, the actual atomic makeup of the rocks matches. It's the same chemical composition. So I'll let him provide the conclusion, because he's about to tell you what that means.
Behold!
Sorry about the ads, fellas. Deal with it for a few seconds for me.
Their official report that it's impossible to be a process of nature. That's the opinion
Impossible to be a process of nature.
of a team of international experts.
And again, that's from a team of international experts, not even just one. A whole team is saying this is impossible to be from nature. These blocks have to be man-made. They were taken from this quarry. They were processed and turned into man-made blocks later. That is the conclusion.
As they state, in nature, organic limestone can be metamorphosed or recrystallized into marble. But marble, even the fine-grained variety, has a larger crystal size than what we see at Sacsayhuaman. Here the crystals are minute, and the structures in the block are uniform. It's a homogeneous rock without fossils or stratigraphy. The scientists go on to discuss how an acidic environment, like the acid content in rainwater...
Okay, so it's a microcrystalline structure. And I've been talking to a guy named Ben on Twitter who's a geopolymer expert. He works in developing modern geopolymers. And I asked him, because if you notice there's strands of quartzite running through this. And I might be getting a little bit ahead of myself, but that is the only potential issue with the idea of these blocks being geopolymer. There's a whole lot of issues that I'm going to cover with these being natural stones. That is the only potential issue with these blocks being geopolymer, are those thin white lines of quartzite running through there. So I asked this geopolymer expert, is it possible that a man-made geopolymer stone could have these quartzite veins? And his response was, we really don't know how these things develop over the course of hundreds or thousands of years. This crystalline process, it doesn't immediately stop necessarily when the geopolymer is formed. So is it theoretically possible that these quartzite veins are developing over time? It might be. We really don't know. It's a science that we just haven't explored enough yet. It's still cutting edge science for us. So that's the only potential issue. I'll get more into that later. But I did want to share like the opinions of a geopolymer expert. I asked him, is this a problem that makes this impossible? And he goes, it is a problem, but we don't know that it's impossible, essentially was what he said. Okay. 20. Bear with me, fellas, as I try and make sure that I'm showing you the right things.
Of geophysics, the large basal blocks on the first level of Sacsayhuaman were also scanned, and it was discovered they were low density and covered with an artificial shell, the shell being made from the same substance as the smaller blocks that sit above. These large blocks are therefore not one compact rock, but are in fact agglomerates. So, in summary, they said there were two types of blocks in the Sacsayhuaman archaeological complex. Type A are the low-density, large blocks of the first level. These are made of a number of rocks, but with the shell of the crystalline substance that covers them. The experts believe that these blocks were made in this way so they could receive as much weight as possible. They were scanned with georadar, and the interior is not homogeneous like the other blocks of Sacsayhuaman. The smaller yet still big blocks above are Type B, and these are made entirely from the fine-grained microcrystalline substance, the same substance that forms the shell of the larger Type A blocks. The report is...
Okay, well, I don't know about you guys, but that sounds pretty darn definitive to me. So to summarize what happened, they looked at these blocks under a microscope, they looked at the quarry under a microscope, realized they don't match. So they did chemical analysis, realized, wait a second, they actually do match. They're the same chemical makeup, but they're different physically. So how do you explain that? Man-made geopolymer. They processed the rocks and turned them into geopolymer. They then did another study where they x-rayed these blocks. So they're walking along these walls with an x-ray machine and scanning them. And what do they see? They see that the largest blocks are not solid. They have a high density shell. Keep this in mind, because at the end of this video, Ancient Architects flips his position and deems that these are natural rocks. So just keep in mind what's being said here, right? It's a high density shell on the outside. So the surface of these blocks is consistent. The surface of these blocks is that same high density material. But on the inside, they have a conglomerate. There's a bunch of other rocks inside. I don't know how to interpret that other than, geopolymer. That seems pretty darn definitive to me. And then these smaller blocks, again, are completely consistent. They are made up of that same material as the hard shell. No conglomeration inside. I don't know how you explain that with natural rocks. That seems pretty clear evidence of geopolymer. But let's keep listening and see what else they have to say. I didn't click stop sharing the screen, but it stopped sharing the screen. Okay. Trying to find the right spot. Hold on. Okay, here we go.
Berdnikov then shows this, which he says is the plasticine stone made from the same mixture, sitting directly on the natural andesite below. This implies the Peruvians were directly working on the andesite surface when they were processing and moulding their blocks.
So what he's talking about is they did further testing, right? So after that last test, they went, we need to figure out what's going on. So they did some further testing, and he's discussing that here. So what they're also describing, listen to what he's saying. The scientist is claiming that this portion here is limestone and geopolymer limestone that they poured directly onto the andesite bedrock, which is what's down here. Limestone and andesite are two very, very different stones. Limestone is limestone, and andesite is a volcanic stone. They're not the same at all in any way, shape, or form. And I don't know if I have the video clips in here, but if you do watch the full video, you realize that there's a whole lot of debate and disagreement and uncertainty on what stones these guys are dealing with. So they didn't even know that those walls were limestone or not. They weren't sure. I'm sorry. I'm doing a poor job of expressing this, but archaeologists have no idea what type of stone they're looking at. That's the message I'm trying to convey here. They cannot decide if they're even looking at limestone or andesite. And this is a problem that pops up frequently just at Sacsayhuaman, but I'm realizing that this is also happening all over. Like apparently archaeologists just label stones things, and it's very often incorrect. It's a very often incorrect label. Kind of blowing my mind that archaeologists aren't even capable of identifying stones properly. But that's a new thing to me that I'm realizing, that I'm learning. So yeah. That's my question. And if you watch the full Ancient Architects video and you're like paying attention to this in your mind, you'll realize that this problem is ridiculous. Like they really can't tell the difference, which blows my mind. I don't understand. My chicken alarm. There we go. But yeah, so he takes, we'll keep listening to what he says here. Just wanted to highlight the fact that they don't know andesite from limestone. And they can't tell here. They can't determine that this part they think is andesite, this part maybe limestone. They don't know.
One man stands up in response and says it's just natural limestone laid out in a conventional way and dismisses everything that's been said to him, which does seem strange in a room full of geologists and also based on the presentation just given.
Tell me, what kind of pouring could be the result of what is seen in this area here? This is all natural limestone laid together using a conventional method.
So I just find that interesting that you have, again, to me, what seems like very definitive proof of geopolymer, and you have a scientist standing up and going, no, you're wrong, you're stupid, this is just natural, there's nothing to see here. Does he have any reasoning to back up his arguments? Does he provide any logical evidence whatsoever? No, he just goes, you're wrong, it can't be, right? This is a forbidden subject, and you're going to see that more clearly when they ultimately end up reversing their position and determining that these are natural blocks, because we're providing some really compelling evidence for geopolymer, and then the little tiny piece of evidence that they use to flip their position, unbelievably flimsy. So, you're starting to see that already, just the irrational, no, it can't be possible. We're not allowed to explore geopolymer. That's not an option.
Another guy then stands up and explains he does agree with Berdnikov's conclusions and believes that these blocks must have been made from a lime-based solution and that the transition from the solution to the rock appears to be very rapid, as is seen by the tiny size of the crystals. He agrees there is likely some missing additive in the mixture. He says that maybe it's something to do with the conditions in Peru, low water saturation, or a certain temperature regime, which allowed for the rapid crystallization to take place. Berdnikov ends his talk by saying that yes, that's the direction the analysis needs to go in. He needs to continue conducting the chemical analysis and examine the physical and mechanical properties of these blocks. But he says quite honestly that good geologists from around the world must be sent to Peru, who should examine the site, take samples with permission, and microsections for analysis, and then maybe the dilemma can be resolved.
Okay, so you just heard the opinion of an expert saying, hey, we need to get to the bottom of this. We need to actually do more testing, proper testing, and figure this out. Do you guys want to take a guess on what actually ended up happening? Do you think that's what these scientists did? Did they follow that course of action? No. Of course not. Of course they did not. But let's keep listening.
The scientists dissolved the samples of Sacsayhuaman limestone. The silica that was left was amorphous in nature, which is expected due to the recrystallization of the rock.
Just another quick little fact in support of the geopolymer idea.
But after releasing the official report to Peruvian authorities, to give him credit, Berdnikov did find a natural way the rocks could have been formed, and it's detailed in the Acida Project paper. Yes, the blocks of Sacsayhuaman could be...
The Acida Project paper, by the way, came out over a year later, I believe. So despite scientists standing up and going, hey, these are natural blocks, there's nothing to see here, they were not able to come up with a natural explanation for like over a year. It took them a while.
Be quarried stone. The initial claim is not right. These blocks are not impossible in nature. You can get the recrystallization of limestone in a natural setting if it was subject to intense heat. So the limestone in the region would have had to have been exposed to some kind of lava extrusion, coming through the natural bedrock limestone formation and then spilling out on top. This would have created the high temperatures needed. And what do we have right in the vicinity of Sacsayhuaman? The famous Rodadero Formation of Cusco, an ancient extrusive silica-rich lava flow that once pushed through the limestone bedrock and then flowed out onto the surface as well. Anywhere below ground or on the surface where the limestone and lava came into contact, the limestone would have been cooked to very high temperatures. The Acida Project paper says the limestone would have been transformed into a type of lime. This lime would then react with rainwater, hot spring water, groundwater or water vapour, and the naturally formed lime would then recrystallize into a type of contact metamorphosed limestone, a type of microcrystalline marble. A sample of limestone was taken in the field right next to the famous Rodadero Formation, but I can't tell if it's a block or bedrock. But this was shown to be the same rock type that makes up the wall blocks of Sacsayhuaman.
Okay, so a couple of things. One, they are suggesting that that formation right across from Sacsayhuaman, it's like a very, very, very short walk. You could throw a ball from one side to the other, basically. They're suggesting now that that is the quarry, that the stone came from right there, very, very locally, not a couple miles away like they thought. This begs some questions that don't seem to be addressed here. Again, the quarry had been identified and universally accepted. There was absolutely zero debate on whether or not that quarry is where the blocks from Sacsayhuaman had come from, the original quarry, not that Rodadero Formation. Okay, so we can see, I showed you the scale of these walls, and those walls are destroyed. The walls used to be a lot taller. The Sacsayhuaman was used as a quarry by the Spanish, so a lot of the blocks have been removed from there. It was actively destroyed. There was a war when the Spanish and the Inca were fighting. That was like one of the final last stands, and actually the Inca were taking it back from the Spanish. It wasn't the Spanish taking it from the Inca. But yeah, a lot of destruction has happened here. So there was a lot more here in the past. I'm just trying to emphasize how big this is. So all of those blocks, right? We identified a quarry where massive quarrying was taking place, and of the same material, where if none of these blocks came from that quarry, where did all of what was quarried from there go? Where'd that go? You have a massive quarry that everyone agreed was the quarry for Sacsayhuaman. Everyone agreed. There was no debate. Something was quarried there. A lot was quarried there. Where did all of that go if it's not Sacsayhuaman? On the same note, you have the Rotadero formation right across from there. Again, this is massive quarrying we're talking about. We're talking about a lot of material here. Where is the evidence for that quarrying happening right there? It's right in front of the scientists, and no one has ever suggested that the stones came from there because there's no evidence for it. They are glossing over so much to just, they're desperate to explain these as natural. So, and also, right, the other point I wanted to make is if you listen to Ancient Architects right there, he shows this. This is where the one scientist was suggesting this is limestone poured on top of andesite. Okay, and it's also where they chose to take the sample from. So they're not even taking it from something that's definitively bedrock. You have one scientist whose opinion is that this is also the poured stone, and that's what they chose to sample to prove that this stone is actually coming from the bedrock across the street. Does that seem like a good test to you guys? Does that seem like a proper way of doing this? And as you're going to see, this is the one tiny, tiny, tiny little piece of evidence that was used to overrule everything else that we've covered and ignore all of the other issues and declare that these are definitely natural blocks and that there's nothing to see here. I think that is not satisfactory at all. I think that we need to do the tests that other scientist was suggesting. I think that this is still a mystery that we need to get to the bottom of. Let's move on to the next section here.
You can see some thin sections show there are calcite veins running through the blocks of Sacsayhuaman. In the veins, the grain size is larger than the bulk of the rock, but in terms of geology, veins occur when hot fluids travel through zones of weakness like fissures, and then cool over a period of time, and that's what forms the crystals. The longer the cooling time, the larger the crystals. Therefore, how can you have veins of calcite running through a man-made concrete that was seemingly made from pulverized stone?
And again, this is the only issue with the geopolymer idea. And I just want to highlight that the images you are seeing there are through microscopes. So those veins, they're very, very small veins. It's not like you're looking at the rocks and you see these big white lines running through them. These veins are detectable under microscopes. So again, when you're creating these geopolymers, this crystallization process, it is something that happens continually. And is it possible that these veins are developing over hundreds of years in this geopolymer? Maybe. We genuinely don't know. But that is the only issue with the geopolymer idea. I haven't even covered all of the issues with the natural stone yet. And taking a sample from something that they're not sure is bedrock or not is the one piece of evidence that they use to overturn all of this. A bit unsatisfactory to me. So now I'm going to go ahead and get into showing you some more images from Sacsayhuaman, and looking at some of these strange features, because there's a lot of them. And we're going to discuss how much sense geopolymer makes versus natural stone. Let me get the image up for the right screen up for you. Okay. These aren't organized as well as I would like them to be. But here we go. So here's part of the wall. And as you can see, there's nubs all over it. And you will find these reverse nubs all over Sacsayhuaman as well. And they are always at the bottom of the stone. The reverse nubs and the regular nubs are always at the very bottom of the stone. And if you look at the nubs, they're usually flat on the bottom. These nubs are right at the bottom of the stone and they're flat. You've got these pillowy shapes and these nice little edges, not only the seams, but I'll have some better pictures to show it later, but the edges are all beveled, right? All the edges are beveled. Here's an interesting feature. If that's a natural block, what carving method caused that? I mean, what is that? You're carving this block out, and then people have gone into this feature specifically and looked into there. The surface of this is vitrified. If you look at it under a microscope, you can actually see that the surface of this has been melted in here. And there's other examples of vitrified surfaces in Peru. These blocks are dry right here, but you can almost tell from this image, when these get wet, they get pretty shiny. They get more shiny than you would expect a natural limestone block to get. Again, somewhat indicative that this could be geopolymer. But if you look up here, right, you can see where these walls are broken, and you can see that it is not just dressed on this very front edge. These contact surfaces are perfect all the way throughout these very, very thick blocks. And imagine that mainstream method, right? You're picking blocks up. This isn't even that big compared to some of the blocks. You're picking these up and you're rubbing them back and forth to get that perfect shape. That go outside and pick up two stones and start rubbing them back and forth and see how long it takes for you to get a perfectly, matched surface of those two stones. It's not a quick process. And you're telling me they're lifting 150-ton blocks up and just sliding them around like it's no big deal? Not to mention that a lot of these have corners, and so how are you maneuvering these blocks in multiple different directions because they have multiple different sides? When you come to a corner, it's not just a straight line, right? You've got it on the back and on the front and on the side. You can't rub those together. It's not possible. More of these reverse nubs, and you don't necessarily see it here, but in a lot of these reverse nubs, you'll also see, and it does look a little bit like it's pushed out slightly from the top here. There's other examples where it really looks more pushed out. Just some images, some different angles that you don't usually see. This is part of Sacsayhuaman. This is near that large. This might actually even be the inside of that large basin I was describing. This is the Rotadero Formation. There's megalithic walls around the Rotadero Formation too. But does this look like this has been quarried? Does it look like all of those stones came from here? This doesn't look quarried to me. The corners, right? Bent blocks, which yes, you can carve that, but look at these nubs. Very, very, just right there on the very bottom. They're all over. A lot of these images I selected for specific things that I wanted to zoom in on and highlight, but I don't remember every single image, so hopefully I don't miss anything important. Here is part of Sacsayhuaman that has been, what would you describe that as? Sure looks melted in some way to me, but not necessarily through heat. I mean, look at that portion of the wall right there. This is Sacsayhuaman. You've got the normal megalithic wall, and then what the heck happened here? It's, something looks like it melted up from down there and down into it's a bit of a strange feature. Perhaps that's just a natural chunk of limestone that was incorporated into the wall. The limestone is very eroded, so maybe that's what we're looking at here, but it does look strange, doesn't it? Just some angles of Sacsayhuaman that you don't often see. Something, I don't have an image for this, but I'll mention it here. So parts of these walls have been destroyed. Parts of these walls are totally collapsed, and you can see the fill, right? Because the walls collapsed, so the fill's spilled out. They're excavating what's inside of there. And I haven't even gotten to the andesite building yet, but that andesite foundation is made out of perfectly squared andesite blocks. They're not perfectly squared because it's a circular formation, so they're actually slightly angled to make a circle, right? But they're perfectly squared andesite blocks, not like these polygonal blocks. They're perfectly flat, perfectly square, perfectly 90-degree angles, you know. And all that's left now is the foundation. Inside of the collapsed walls, the infill of these megalithic Sacsayhuaman walls, we have found those square andesite blocks. So trying to put together a timeline here, right? The Inca, being 500 years ago, are credited with building Sacsayhuaman. But it would appear that whoever built these megalithic walls came after the it's going to be a hassle to pull up an image there, but I showed you earlier that image, you know, of the foundations. It's on the screenshot, or it's on the thumbnail of this video. You can see those foundations. So whatever that building was, whatever that structure was, it was already destroyed and being used as just rubble, as fill-in for dirt, not even for construction, just fill. They were tossing these blocks into the backfill, right? And then you also have the Hanan pacha style carvings, which are that bedrock, which I'll show some more images of that in a bit, but that bedrock that's just cut, and it looks like it's cut like a hot knife through butter. The cuts are very smooth and but not even straight. It looks effortless. It looks like someone's just walking around with a hot knife through butter. So you have the andesite building, which seems to be older than the megalithic walls, and then you have the Hanan pacha style construction, which seems to be older than either of those, because as you find it throughout Peru, the Hanan pacha seems to be the oldest style because the other styles are often built on top of it. You obviously can't build on top of it without doing it first. So trying to put together a timeline, and I'll get back to that more later when I get to some other images. But yeah, does it make sense that within a 150-year time period, they would build whatever that building was out of andesite? It collapses or is destroyed or whatever, and then they use the rubble as backfill for these walls. And before any of that, all of the carving of the bedrock happens, and all of this happens in a 150-year time period with the Incas. I don't know. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Again, does that look like this has been quarried? Does that look like all of these stones from, you know, this is the perspective of this picture is Sacsayhuaman. So someone standing on Sacsayhuaman looking out at the Rodadero Formation. Does that look like massive, massive amounts of quarrying took place here? Here's that basin. So carved into the andesite bedrock here is this massive basin that goes down 65 feet. So it's this big parabolic bowl. It's this huge ring. It's filled with dirt now. It hasn't been excavated. Experts think that there are tombs here. There are some stones in the middle of this that they've scanned with ground penetrating radar. And it seems that these structures do potentially go all the way down to the base of this 65-foot basin. And they think that the Inca were using this as a tomb. Again, does that make sense to you? Someone came to this plateau. They carved out of the andesite bedrock this massive, massive basin. It gets filled up with dirt over time. And there's very strong evidence. If you watch the ancient architects videos, I agree with him. This was a water basin. This was meant as water storage. He provides great arguments in his videos. So what was originally a water tank ends up being filled in with dirt over who knows how much time. Then the Inca show up and they start using this basin as a graveyard, as a tomb. Again, I don't know how that makes sense and fits into a 150-year time period that they carved all of this out. And even if you go to the, I forget their name, but there is a group of people, the pre-Incas, right, who are acknowledged at being at Sacsayhuaman. But again, it's adding like another 50 years onto the timeline or something. It still doesn't make any sense. And this is that Hanan pacha style carving where this certainly doesn't make sense. Like I said, it looks effortless. It looks like someone's just walking around with like a hot knife through butter. And if you look closely at these cuts, you can't necessarily tell from this image, but these aren't actually straight lines. They're very smooth lines. They're very flat lines, but they're not actually straight. Again, it looks like it's effortless. I don't know how else to describe it other than it looks like it's effortless, because they're not. To do this through traditional methods would be a massive amount of effort and labor. And yet they aren't putting in the effort to actually make these things straight, but they are putting in the effort to make them incredibly smooth and incredibly flat. It's just a confusing set of features. And then you also look at the state of the rock itself. The rock itself, being natural rock, is heavily eroded. It's in terrible shape. And you look at the cuts are not nearly as heavily eroded. So the cuts, again, I don't think are 12,000 years old. I think we are looking at something relatively recent, maybe quite a bit older than 500 years, but not going back tens of thousands of years. This is limestone. It's fairly hard limestone, but limestone is very susceptible to acid. You pour vinegar on it and it dissolves. So I don't think these cuts are tens of thousands of years old. But I don't think they're from the Inca either. Huge blocks. And again, you can see where, reconstruction happened, where repairs happened. This is common throughout all megalithic sites in Peru, is that the Inca were repairing these things. So you have multiple phases of building happening to the point that, again, the andesite building was not only constructed, but destructed all within this very short time period and used as backfill for this. So before this was ever constructed, the andesite building was constructed, destroyed, and then used. Again, just the timeline is not adding up here. There's obviously, we're looking at a larger timeline than what mainstream is proposing, but I don't think it goes back 12,000 years. Again, look how clean these cuts are. These would be more heavily eroded if they were 12,000 years old. And it also looks upside down here, right? Like none of these features make any sense, but this particularly especially doesn't make sense. It kind of looks like this was a boulder that was cut and shaped and then blown up and flipped upside down. And that might be exactly what happened. There are I'll show a specific image later, which shows that this destruction, and actually I have some more videos from ancient architects that I might play. I think I'm going to go ahead and play a couple videos from ancient architects and then talk about this. A couple quick. There we go. Actually, this one, I think. All right, let's hear what he has to say here. And real quick, before I even get into this, what I was just talking about, the repairs, right? So there's a mirror, or there's a wall mirroring this wall that's right on the right side of the screen that you can't see. And the other wall is this style still, this perfectly fit blocks. This is clearly a repair. So again, this is Machu Picchu we're looking at here. But Machu Picchu, which was occupied for 100 years by the Inca, does it make sense that they constructed this megalithic wall? They were capable of constructing this. The wall was somehow damaged in that 100 years, and then they weren't capable of repairing it back to its original state, but only to this state. It just doesn't really add up to me. But let's hear what Ancient Architects has to say here.
I stated in my last video that a lot of the damage is modern, inflicted in the past 500 years. Not some kind of ancient natural catastrophe, but destruction created by humans to remove vestiges of the indigenous Andean cultures. As well as the destruction during and after the Spanish conquest, we know that parts of Sacsayhuaman were destroyed by dynamite blasts in the early 20th century, when parts of the site became a quarry, and also because authorities wanted the underground tunnels blocked to stop treasure hunters and tourists exploring them. They were all.
So, a couple things there. One, there is this narrative that evil white people were going around Peru with dynamite and just blowing shit up because it upset them that the Inca were capable of doing impressive things. I don't know. That sounds a little bit off to me, especially because it seems that they were exclusively blowing up that Hanan pacha style construction. They weren't blowing up the megalithic walls. They weren't blowing up all of these other very impressive things. And maybe you can make sense of that because the megalithic walls could be used as a quarry. So maybe they didn't blow those up because they wanted to destroy them in other ways and steal, the stone blocks, these evil white men. And so they only blew up the shaped bedrock because that's useless as a quarry, but it looks impressive, so we're going to go around with dynamite and blow that up. I don't know. That doesn't make a ton of sense to me. At the same time, I do agree with his overall conclusion. The destruction very obviously is recent. If you actually look at these sites and you look closely, it is obvious to tell that this destruction seems to have happened in the last 500 years. And I don't know how else to explain the level of destruction where you have just these massive chunks of bedrock that have been completely flipped upside down and just strewn about. I don't know how you explain that without people running around with dynamite. So maybe the Spanish really were that jelly that they were like, we can't have these Spanish having these impressive structures. We got to blow them up with dynamite. I don't know. The other thing that he mentioned there, if you guys have been paying attention to archaeology news lately, you might have seen the big revelation about these tunnels underneath Sacsayhuaman. They go from this church in Cusco all the way to Sacsayhuaman, and they go other places. And it's this huge discovery. They just discovered it with ground-penetrating LiDAR. The scientists confirmed there's these tunnels underneath Sacsayhuaman. My research started on Sacsayhuaman before that news broke. So when I was doing research into Sacsayhuaman, I wasn't paying attention to the tunnels because that news hadn't broken yet, right? There are so many references to these tunnels. They weren't lost. They didn't just get discovered. These tunnels were well known about. The specific, the details of these tunnels were well known. It's not just there's tunnels there. We're aware of this. No, it was fully known that this tunnel went from the church to Sacsayhuaman. The tunnels, it's well documented. I don't know. It's just very strange to me how this is being presented as this great new find. And it also highlights I thought things don't get lost. We're talking about within our lifetimes, these tunnels were known about. People were walking through these tunnels, exploring these tunnels. These tunnels were shut down deliberately by the government because of earthquakes and people getting various reasons. There was some damage due to earthquakes. The church collapsed, right? So an earthquake wiped out the church, and that's when these tunnels were shut down. And also people were allegedly getting lost in there and maybe dying. So authorities closed down the tunnels. And now they're discovering them. There's major, look, scientists there's tunnels under there. By the way, there's tunnels under all of these megalithic sites. Go find a megalithic site in the world. There's underground work associated with it, almost 100% of the time. It rarely gets covered. It rarely gets talked about. But whatever these people were doing above ground, they were also doing below ground. So,
Also potentially dangerous.
tunnels that everyone knew about are a big discovery. What else does he have to say here?
There are also a number of videos on YouTube that show people heading through tunnels from Piedra Cansada and ending up at Cocachincanas.
So again, like, you can go on YouTube and you can find videos of people in the tunnels. What are you talking about? This major discovery. Anyways, here's a video that's just showing some strange features, right? So there are a lot of strange things going on with the rocks in Peru. Out of anywhere in the world, it has the most anomalous features. I talked about the vitrified surfaces. I've got some more photos later that I'll show you for even more vitrified surfaces. I believe that Sacsayhuaman is geopolymer. Okay, so I do believe they were making geopolymer, but I think they were doing a lot more than just one thing. And this video here, just look at the rocks here. You have a natural rock formation, and they've shaped, obviously, the front of this. They've carved that, obviously, right? But then look down below it. Right in front of where they've carved off the face of this rock, you have this differently colored rock. It almost looks like it's just slumped down and run down the side, like they melted off the surface of this. And you see how this is only slumped in front of where they carved it. It's not further down here. Did they just melt the surface of this rock off? I don't know. I'm not aware of any method capable of doing that. But you look at all of the strange features in Peru, and you do kind of have to start asking yourself these questions, because it is all just so incredibly strange. These channels carved through there. And look at that. They're walking on that surface there. It's a different color than the rest of this rock. It's only in front of where they, shaved this down. It really looks like it was just like melted off the front and slumped down there. Maybe I'm crazy, but it sure does look like that, doesn't it? And then you also have these cavities carved out everywhere. These are often referred to as quarries. People call these quarry marks. You can't... Oh, geez, I'm not showing the video. How long was I doing that for? A while, huh? A while. All right. Sorry. Well, I'll show you everything that I was talking about. All right. It looks like that's been melted off the face. Maybe that's not what's happening at all, but it does look strange. So I don't think the Hanan pacha works were destroyed. This is natural. You can find this work buried deep under the soil. This was the design of the builders. I both agree and disagree. The destroyed nature of it, I think, is just like natural weathering. It is confusing because you have this Hanan pacha style carved into this extremely rough rock. The rock itself is very, very rough, but then you have these very clean cuts made into the rock. So yeah, I agree that like that surface that you're seeing isn't destruction. That's just what the rock looked like when they decided to carve into it. However, you do see, and I'll show a specific image. It's coming up in my gallery. I'm not sure exactly when, but you can actually see one of these Hanan pacha style rocks that is leaning up against the Sacsayhuaman walls. So you can't build the walls if the Hanan pacha was already there. It does look like this giant boulder was blown up with dynamite, flung across the field, and ended up resting up against these walls. So there does seem to be destruction that took place in modern times of these Hanan pacha style things, but that destroyed look, yes, that is natural, and I do agree with that. I think I have one more video from Ancient Architects to show, so I'm going to pull that up, and then we'll get back to more images. Don't know why my computer keeps playing my video. Nor do I know where my video is currently playing from. All right, there we go. Sorry, technical difficulties. Okay. Showing the video. Here we go. Last video from Ancient Architects.
These tunnels cut through the limestone bedrock are water channels, showing clear signs of water erosion.
Actually, I think that was just about the tunnels. So I think I've already shown all of the Ancient Architects videos. So back to the images. Back to the images. All righty, here we go. Sorry, fellas. It's difficult. I'm such a boomer. I have a hard time keeping track of all of the different screens. So I appreciate your patience as I struggle. Let's see here. That's one of the Hana Pancha style rocks that is near Sacsayhuaman. And again, it just makes no sense. And it looks effortless. But you can look at this. Yeah, I don't think this is destruction. Like, you're looking at the weathered state of the rock. I don't think that's destruction. I think that's how this rock largely looked when whoever carved it. And then they came along and they carved all of these very strange features into it. And it looks like their carving is effortless. Again, it's very, very smooth. It's very, very flat. And you can't tell here so much, but a lot of these lines are not actually straight. They're not actually like even. Again, it looks like someone's walking around with a hot wire cutter, and this is just like insulation foam, and they're just effortlessly carving through it. You get really straight, smooth cuts doing that with a hot wire cutter, but they're also not like perfect. You're not going to get perfectly flat 90-degree angles. And that's exactly the kind of stuff you see in this Hanan Pancha style work. This is another image of the Rotadero Formation. Does this look like the stone that Sacsayhuaman is made out of? Because that's what they're claiming. Just spectacular look. I mean, look at that person compared to these blocks down here. And then again, you can look at these blocks. They clearly look different. There is a clear distinction between these medium-sized blocks and these lower-sized blocks, exactly as the scientists were explaining. I think that quite possibly what you're looking at, let me see if I can find a good image to highlight something. All right, this one will work. Okay, so how do you pour this, right? Because this is... the top isn't flat, right? So you can't just like pour this into this shape and then plop down other blocks. So I don't think these were poured. I think you're working with something a little more viscous that they're putting on almost like a plaster. With the larger blocks in particular, like this, I think what they were likely doing was building a wall kind of like this, a loose stone wall, and then plastering over these things somehow with this other material. Because if you look at this through the idea, this doesn't work with pouring. I don't think it was poured, but I do think it was geopolymer. Right. And going back real quick, when they get wet, you see they're wet, how, they kind of look shiny. Does this look like something that was hammered with stones to get this shaped? Is that what you would expect to see from pounding on this with stones? Looks a little shiny to me. And it's also just, you have these pillowing out, but you also have that nice little beveled edge on all of these stones. There's a nice little bevel around the edge, which I'm going to show you an example of modern geopolymer that looks shockingly similar to that. Again, just strange Hanan Pancha. You can see how eroded this stone is. they're making this straight cut down into this stone. The stone itself isn't even there to be cut straight, right? Like this is eroded. So they're making this perfectly straight cut with nothing but pounding stones and copper tools, because that's what the technological, abilities of these people were supposedly, is copper. It's just confusing stuff. You got water management included in here with later Incan repairs. So that's another thing, is that the Inca were absolutely very talented people. There's a lot of Inca repairs to these water systems. The Inca were very talented with water. You can see up here where it's broken. Again, it's not just the very front edge that's perfect. These blocks were perfectly fit on all surfaces. And they allegedly did that by rubbing the stones back and forth. Okay. And again, like, look at the shapes here. Acute angles and everything. Does that... It doesn't make any sense to me. Beautiful water management here. And there's that vitrified part potentially. Beautiful water fountains cascading down, and beautiful megalithic wall with some beautiful windows. I haven't gotten to the strangest features yet. I'm just showing pictures of the rocks, but there's some really strange features that I will be highlighting later. Again, this is like, so I don't think this is destroyed here. I think this was the state of the rock when it was carved. So they're making these very clean cuts into this extremely eroded rock. Why? None of this makes any sense. You got strange little levels, all these steps. Like, this is very precise, I don't even have the words to like describe what I'm seeing. It's just strange. And then it looks like these are cuts as well. Maybe they're natural fissures. More interesting false windows and beautiful megalithic work. Person for scale. Just huge blocks. Little head poking out there. And again, does this make any sense whatsoever? This is an example where I think this one probably was destroyed. I think this one was blown up with dynamite. It looks upside down to me. Granted, none of these cuts make any sense whatsoever, so trying to determine that this is upside down really can't be done. But it looks upside down to me. It looks like this was blown up. Look at these edges here. Not only are there just random little, like, if you were trying to fit blocks together perfectly, is this how you would do it, with these random little indentations and divots matching each other? Or would you just flatten out this surface? What makes more sense? What is more effort? And just like, why would you ever do this? And you see this all over. And you also see, look how clean that little edge is. And there's a ridge here. It's not as clear in this photo as it is in some other photos, but this is actually slightly concave, or at least right here on the ridge, this is elevated slightly. So the edges of these blocks are not only perfectly flat and flush against each other, but then they have a slightly elevated ridge and a bevel where they meet. Not the best photo to highlight that, but you'll see that more clearly later. And again, you're rubbing these blocks back and forth. Another thing to highlight is these have not been fully excavated. So this looks like ground level here. It's not. There are even larger and even more blocks underneath here. I say they're even larger. I assume that because that's the general structure of this, right? Smaller stones on top, medium stones, bigger stones. So I would assume even bigger stones down here. The biggest stones here are like 150 tons. And this is not ground level, right? So you're still having to hold up that 150-ton block and you're sliding it back and forth. Yeah, okay. Okay, buddy. This one's Machu Picchu, slipped in here. Just an example of the strange Hanan pacha style. Here is a modern geopolymer stone. And you can see he poured one stone and then like made false cuts in here. And it is kind of remarkable how similar these beveled edges and this pillowy surface looks to the Inca stones. It does look very, very similar. And here's a close-up of that same image, which you'll see if you look at the Inca stones and their joints, they look a lot like this. And let me go ahead and pull up something else real quick. Golly, I think I just accidentally closed that window. So I'm going to have to find my place in those images again. But let me pull up something specific here. Might need to let my dog out. He's struggling right now.
Here, this is the third one on this video.
Okay, so
The stones on the bottom were placed just later in modern times.
if you look there, this is one solid block, but what is that false cut? That looks very, very, very similar to what I was just showing you on that modern geopolymer. And if you're listening to the guy, he says this is the third false cut that they're showing on this video. I've only got this one little one, but yes, there are other false cut examples at Sacsayhuaman where you have that cut. What's going on there? I'm not sure. Let me try and pull up my images again because I accidentally just closed them. Let's see if I can find where I was so we don't have to flick through all of them. There's the Inca stone. Okay, I was right here. Perfect. Now let me share my screen again. I appreciate your patience dealing with an old boomer trying to use tech. Just another example. So this is all one stone, right? This is geopolymer, but it's just showing like, look at how natural that surface looks. And then, you pressed into it to get the mold there. But this is what modern geopolymer looks like. Again, it's a very confusing thing to try and make sense of this Hanan pacha style because you have this incredibly eroded bedrock, and then you have the Hanan pacha carved right into it. It's obviously less eroded, right? You can see here relatively smooth surfaces, but then some of it does look eroded. Is that just because they're just carving into the eroded portions and that's how it originally looked? Or is there, further damage that has happened? I don't know. But it's just confusing. Why this is such low quality rock, but they're making such precise cuts in it. Doesn't make much sense to me. This is not Sacsayhuaman. This is Cusco. This is a city nearby, and this is diorite. So we're talking about limestone, right? And I'm suggesting it's geopolymer, but I'm also suggesting that these Peruvians were doing so many different things in stone. I wish this was a higher quality image. But you can see that ridge there, right? Again, it's not just perfectly fit together. And again, here's a really low quality image. Wish it was better. But this is not a flat surface. There's two stones up above here. And you have one angled surface here for this stone and another angled surface here for this stone with a little ridge in between to fill in perfectly that little gap with little ridges rising up. And then that beveled edge. Very, very much like what you see with geopolymer. But if this is geopolymer being diorite, take that with a grain of salt because apparently archaeologists have no idea what stone they're looking at. But this is labeled as diorite. It would be a completely different process. I'm not saying you can't do geopolymer with both, but it's a totally different geopolymer. It's a totally different process. So if this is geopolymer also, it's being done through a different way. More Hanan pacha style. I don't think this is at Sacsayhuaman. This is somewhere else. It slipped in here. Strange nubs. Again, strange, effortless looking cuts. Like there was a lot of material removed off of this surface, at least a good foot or two removed off of this surface. You can see like these two surfaces don't even match up. There's perfect flat surface there, but then it doesn't match up in a perfect flat surface there. And it looks like also this flat surface is depressed by about an inch lower than this flat surface. So really precise cuts. Again, I'm struggling to even like find the words to describe what I'm looking at here because it's just so strange and so confusing. I didn't even think these images were in here. I thought I had this in a different folder. But whatever, we can show this. Rather interesting. Again, just strange, strange, strange features. Here's a really good example of those reverse nubs, right? Obviously, something was in here. You can tell by the color difference. Was that iron? It kind of looks like rust. Could there have been some type of iron in there? I don't know. But not only are these reverse nubs, look at above them. It is bowed out. It's like pushed out. Like there was something shoved into a soft geopolymer and it pushed the material out around it. Is that definitely what's happened here? No, but it sure looks like it. More of these very, very strange, effortless cuts. This is not straight. I want to emphasize how not straight this is. It's not perfect, and yet it is also perfect. Again, it looks like someone taking a hot wire cutter through foam. This is the exact type of cuts you would see with a hot wire cutter through foam, where you're just moving it by hand and you're getting this perfectly like smooth cut, but it's also just a hand-driven cut. Really, really confusing. That looks slightly edited to me. I don't know. Something about those blocks don't look right. There are a lot, maybe it's just the lighting. There are a lot of AI images popping up. I did my best. I really tried to not include any AI images, but some might have gotten in. What are we looking at here? What is this pattern in design that's in these blocks here? Looks like a steel chicken wire. Almost. I don't know. That's strange. There's the thumbnail. Andesite building. Over here, I believe, is the water tank, and right below Sacsayhuaman is where the Rodadero formation is. Those are those reverse nubs there, with some other reverse nubs on the screen too. Yeah, buddy, I know you're struggling. I gotta go let my dog out, fellas. I'll be back. I'm sorry. I've got a 13-year-old deaf and autistic pit bull, and he's, he's getting up there, and there's more tummy troubles lately, so. There are specific images that I'm waiting for. I don't know exactly where they're at in here. I may have saved too many images this time. I've had the problem of not having enough images before, and I might have gone overboard this time. More examples of that Hanan pacha style. That is just, like, there's so many cuts into this boulder. And I don't know about you, but I can't make sense of a single one of them. Do any of these cuts make sense to you? again, really, really, really clean cuts that make no sense. And not even necessarily like they're clean, but like the right and the left side don't even really match each other. It looks like someone's just going through there with a hot knife. I think this is where the tunnels are located, underneath this thing. Look at the angles here. You're rubbing those blocks together to get that. Just that. This isn't flat. This isn't straight. There's a little nipple there, and you find that here. Little nipple there to fit into those blocks. That little thing right there. Every single part of this makes no sense. This is also not, I swear to God, I took these images out of this gallery. I moved them to another one, but obviously not. So here's comparing what what Sacsayhuaman looked like originally, and this is after she had some work done. So pretty cool though to see what this looked like, when it was found. That you can see how much earth was removed from the top up here. A lot of excavations have been done. And I'm glad excavations have been done, but like I said, these walls are deteriorating, and the excavations are probably contributing to that. If this stuff was all buried, it would probably last longer. So here is an example that is sometimes shown to show like, oh, look, these blocks weren't as perfect all the way through. The matching, is only at the very surface. And maybe that's what this is showing, or could it be showing the plaster that's being applied over those smaller blocks? I don't know. And again, here's some blocks. Just look at these edges. You see that little ridge there to go perfectly. There was one block here and another block here. This isn't a flat surface. You can see here, this is like a irregularly shaped concave surface, but it matched perfectly. It would have matched whatever block this was on. It would have been a watertight seal with that totally irregular surface. Then you have this tiny little ridge to fit in that tiny little seam in between the two blocks. And then again, another block's surface here. Same thing over here. Totally irregularly shaped surface, two different angles with a perfect little, seam going in between there. Does that make sense through traditional means? You're using pounding stones and copper tools, and this is what you're doing to get that kind of fit? Why would you not just flatten this? Why would you not just make that flat? It would be so much easier. It would make so much more sense. Oh, is that the end of this gallery? That's the end of this gallery. I've got more galleries. Before I get into the really strange stuff in the final gallery, I'm going to read through chat, see what you guys have been saying, because I've been neglecting chat. Yeah, am I the only one that like immediately made that link? I'm like, this is a sexy woman, and is she natural? Or like so many jokes immediately, but I don't hear other people calling her a sexy woman. I don't know. It was obvious to me. Interesting. Yeah, I think you're clearly seeing the Hanan pacha style being the oldest, right? And most confusing. I think that is some civilization that we probably have lost, that is not identified. And then I think you see the Inca moving into these sites, and the Inca are doing ridiculous amounts of work. Like, I don't know exactly where to draw the line of what's Inca work and what's not, but all of the terracing seems to be Inca work. A lot of the water management seems to be Inca work, and a lot of the water management also seems to be original, but much of that original work has been repaired by the Incas. And so, like, even if you're trying to credit a lot of this stuff to some lost civilization, the Inca were undeniably a very, very impressive people that were doing very, very impressive things and very large scale things. We're talking about a civilization that spanned the entire west coast of South America. like Bolivia, Argentina, Peru. They are all the way through that Andean mountain range, which also presents a larger problem for archaeology, right? When I'm talking about how all of this was lost over the course of within 500 years, all of this is allegedly 500 years old. We have no idea how any of it was built. We have no idea what technology or techniques were used. And it's not like it's one little location. This was a huge civilization spanning an entire continent. And within 500 years, all of that information has been lost. So, yeah, it doesn't, there's a lot of very impressive stonework around the world, right? And I think that I don't know that it is all due to traditional means, but at the very least, it can all be explained through traditional means. How practical that is debatable, right? But it at least is explained through that. What you see in Peru is not explained by traditional means. And I'm not just talking about the big blocks, but I'm talking about the vitrification you see, the weird manipulation of stones that is clearly not traditional techniques that I'm about to show you. Yeah, there's a lot of very, very strange things going on in Peru. And like I said, I think there's a lot of very strange things. I don't think we're looking at one explanation. You know, like geopolymer does not explain everything in Peru. Melting the stones doesn't explain everything in Peru. There's many different things that we're looking at. I can only see top chat on StreamYard. I don't have a way to change that. So I'm not seeing the Cretans, but thank you, April. I appreciate you and for joining. I did a Danny's show. I called into Danny's show and talked about NAGPRA, and it seems people liked that. A lot of people viewed my channel. Unfortunately, they all viewed my most recent video, which was just the after show, which was complete and total non-tent. So I don't know if it converted to too many actual viewers, but April Parker is here. Good to see you, and thank you for joining the show. Good to see you here too, Rubate. Interesting. That is an interesting thing. I'll look into that because I watched Ancient Architects. I linked a couple of his videos, but he did an entire series on Peru. He has like 6 videos in a row or something on it. And he goes pretty in depth into his explanation for why he thinks these were water features and water management. And it was fairly convincing. I didn't have a better explanation, but that is interesting if that's true. Yes, it is. And that's a great point. I don't know if I really covered that, but it is limestone, and it is not your standard limestone. It is a lot harder than your standard limestone, which could be part of the reason why they can't tell it apart from volcanic andesite. No, that's ridiculous. They should be able to do that. They're being tarded. But yes, this is not your standard limestone. Yeah, and I do kind of agree with that. That's what the destruction that we're seeing, I'm not sure that white dudes with dynamite who are jealous explains it. I think it could explain some of it, but I don't know that it explains all of it. The destruction is very confusing, but one thing about the destruction is that it doesn't seem to be 12,000 years old. It doesn't seem to be the result of this like global cataclysm. Whatever did destroy this stuff seems to be much more recent. Whether it's exactly within the last 500 years or maybe something happened a little bit earlier, I don't know, but it's not from 12,000 years ago. Yes, you can clearly tell the modern repair work versus the original. Yeah, and I don't really have a full explanation for how the walls were built. I do have some ideas, but I don't think they're really worth they're not fleshed out enough that I'm like, this is how it was done, right? But I do think it's geopolymer, and we need to explore, like, okay, can you do this with bags? Can you do this just by like plastering over a loose stone wall? How could this actually be done? And testing is what's needed. And people are doing the test. You got Mondo Stone, like I just showed you from Mondo Stone, that modern geopolymer. People are taking up the burden that archaeologists have dropped, and amateurs are running with it, and they are doing tests like this. So I'm very bullish for 2025, like I said, and maybe we'll actually get some tests done and people will figure this stuff out. I didn't even go into this, but they talk about the silica in the stones. In the longer Ancient Architects video, they get into more of the chemical composition and the high silica that's found and stuff. Water glass, I think, is potentially that missing ingredient, right? Because those scientists were stepping up and going, maybe there's something missing in this mix that we haven't identified yet, and that's contributing this silica. Maybe that is the water glass. So I'm not sure, but it could be the water glass. I know it sounds like you're against Marcel there, but I actually think his theory could help explain Peru, potentially. Again, testing needs done. I mean, I don't want to get into that argument. He can make stone. Whether he can make stone that actually explains what we're seeing in the ancient past, that's definitely debatable. But yeah, Wandering Wolf is great. He shows a lot of very, very interesting stuff. Okay. So let's get into my final section here with some more images of some very interesting features. These are not Sacsayhuaman, okay? So this is a cave. This is inside of a cave, and this is referred to as an altar, and you can very clearly see it on here. Am I showing my screen? I am. Good. Okay, let me get rid of that, and there we go. If you look at this under a microscope, which people have, there's videos on YouTube of people taking jeweler's loops to sites in Peru, including that weird little like melted out feature in that one stone on the corner that I showed of Sacsayhuaman. If you look at that with a jeweler's loop, you can actually see that the surface of it has been vitrified. It has been melted. It's been turned into glass. You see the exact same thing on the interior of this cave. This surface has actually been vitrified. This is turned into glass. It is not just shiny because it's been polished or because there's like something on the surface. It is glass that is on the surface. This has been melted. And what's very interesting is it is just the very, very surface that has been melted. So if you can't explain this through like traditional fire, because to get the surface of this stone up to those levels of heat to melt it, like it would be more than just the surface. I feel like I sounded retarded saying that, but hopefully you understood what I'm trying to say. So whatever did this, and it's all surfaces of this cave. So it's the roof of this cave, it's the walls of this cave, the floor of this cave. Everything is coated in this very thin vitrified surface that is completely inexplicable through, the means that we have of explaining these things. Again, a traditional fire cannot explain this. It seems as if a very, very hot iron was taken and just run over the surface to very, very like flash melt the very surface of it and not heat up the entire stone itself. Because also stone, you throw stone in a fire, it breaks, it cracks, it makes it weak. So it's like whatever was doing this was just flash melting the very, very surface of this stone and not the rest. And it's doing it on all angles. Some people have proposed solar flares to explain this, which I would be much more open to the idea of solar flares if we weren't finding this inside of a cave. This is the interior of a cave. So I don't know how a solar flare melts that. Here we have Chulpa Towers by Lake Titicaca. And these Chulpa Towers, let me show some other images of these Chulpa Towers. Here's another Chulpa Tower. Here's another Chulpa Tower. This one's not very well known, but it's very impressive and interesting. Here's some more images of those Chulpa Towers. Look at that. Look at just how beautiful and huge and perfect these stone blocks are. Strange infill, but these outer blocks, absolutely immaculate and massive. And then what's this up here? What's that strange little indentation up there? Let's go back to that first image. And you have these very strange indentations in these stones. What the hell is going on here with these perfectly fit together stones that have these strange indentations in them? So I think what you might be looking at here, again, is geopolymer. Now, why they would construct this way, I don't exactly know, but it kind of looks like what you're seeing is they took an actual stone, placed it in the middle for structural purposes or bonding purposes, maybe bonding purposes, right? I don't really know. And then they poured or formed in whatever way the geopolymer around it. So you have two stones with artificial stones with an actual stone in the middle to, I guess, bond them together. I'm not entirely sure. But if this is natural stone and you're trying to get these perfect fits, why in the world would you ever carve out these cavities in the middle? I don't know. I will say I just thought of this as a potential possible explanation for these being actual natural stones. So I am going to share it. I do try and be fair. I do try and share both sides. Like I showed the issues with geopolymer, like the quartzite veins. I try and be fair. Okay, so if you were trying to get two surfaces perfectly bonded together, hollowing out the middle does reduce the surface area that you would need to work. And so you would have less surface area that you actually need to have perfect. But at the same time, if that is what you're seeing here, it seems like that is an unnecessary amount to hollow out. I mean, that's several inches of material removed. So if you were just trying to lower it down so you could get a perfectly bonded surface, you'd only have to remove a 1/4 inch of material, not several inches. So I'm not sure that really helps explain much. And it's also not what you see in other stones. But yeah, very strange features in the chulpas with those and then again, nubs. You see nubs on them with those strange hollows in the middle of the blocks. You also see some carvings on here. This carving looks different from these carvings. Marcel Fodi in his book points out this specific image and claims that these are pressed into the geopolymer, that these are not actually carved out embosses like this one is, this later attempt, but these are just pressed in. I showed you those Mondo stones earlier. Certainly looks like that could be the explanation. I'm not convinced it is, but could be. Very strange towers. The chulpas of Lake Titicaca. Okay, and then, back to looking at these Hanan Pancha style cuts. I pointed this out earlier, but you have these square cuts all over, these squares cut out of the bedrock. And this is often referred to as quarry marks. These are not quarries. This cannot be a quarry. This isn't the best example, but if we were to actually, let me find a better example. I want to find a better example. Let me scroll through here until I find a better example. I know I've got good examples in here. All right, this one will do. This one will do. So you look at this here, this square cut out of this bedrock here. And we cannot do this today. We would use a circular saw, right? So if you were using a circular saw, you'd either have overcuts coming out down around the edges, or you wouldn't be able to get all the way back to the back and have this perfect 90-degree angle here where it's cut. So they are cutting straight into the rock, straight into the rock, straight into the rock, straight into the rock, and then straight down the back, right? So we can't quarry like this today. We can't just cut a block out of the block, because how do you make that cut down the back? Not even how do you make these cuts on the side, which we can't, but how are you cutting down the back? These are not quarry marks. These squares are cut out all over the place. They're not quarries. You can't remove a block from here like that. Yeah, it just, people refer to them as quarries. They're not quarries. Look at the volume of material being removed for these stairs. And it's hard to tell in a lot of cases when you're looking at this Hanan pacha style how much was removed, because the boulders are so irregular. They're so heavily worn. They're so irregularly shaped. It's hard to, even when you have these big straight line cuts and you can tell that it's a huge cut, it's hard to tell how much material was removed. But I think oftentimes it's a massive amount of material. We're looking at, here's that cave, just a better view of that vitrified glassy surface in that cave, along with, again, just like very precise cuts. You look down here, like this is curved, but it's precise. There's a better image of what I was showing you earlier. You can see how this is not a flat surface. It actually curves up, right? Where does that make sense through traditional means? Having all of these little ridges to perfectly fit in between all of these little gaps, to have it curve up like that, and then this beveled edge, and then the pillowy surface out front. Is that really a stylistic choice that they were choosing to do? And something I didn't highlight before, but like the nubs, right? You have nubs on so many of these blocks. So they're taking this level of effort to shape these blocks this perfectly, to get these little tiny ridges. So it's so perfect, right? But then they're leaving like the front of the blocks just this pillowy mess with nubs on it. There's a very huge discrepancy between like the level of work, if we're dealing with traditional methods, that's going into finishing the inside surfaces of these blocks that aren't going to be seen, and then the outer surfaces that are seen, that are totally imperfect and rough and just covered in nubs and random features and scoop marks and things like that. Why are you going through this much effort to shape the interior surfaces, but then you leave the outside covered in scoop marks and all these other things? Really, really just like, what is going on? None of this makes sense. Are those, no, those are plants. I thought those were nubs for a second, but it looks like that might be a nub right there. Do any of these features make any sense whatsoever? They don't to me. So regardless of lost civilization or 500-year-old Incas, this is a complete and total mystery that mainstream archaeology has utterly failed to explain, and it highlights just how little we actually understand of our past and how much can be lost. If all of this was lost within the time period of 500 years, and a lot less than 500 years, this was all lost by the time the Spanish arrived. Right? The Inca were collapsing when the Spanish arrived. And by the time the Spanish were interacting with them, all of this knowledge and information was already lost. This is Ollantaytambo. Look at the size of this block. This is like 5,500 feet in elevation. The mountains are cliff-like. They are very sheer and steep. And look at these nubs that are on here. Look at how far out this nub is sticking. These blocks likely were not in this condition when they were quarried and dragged up this mountain. They likely had a surface coming out all the way extending, where these nubs are. Imagine if that much was removed from every side of this block. We've got blocks that are like 150 tons at Ollantaytambo that have been hauled up 5,500 feet. And I'm assuming they were shaped at Ollantaytambo and these nubs were created at Ollantaytambo, and they didn't come out of the quarry looking exactly like this. How heavy were these blocks when they were being dragged up that mountain? If they're 150 tons now, and I have a better photo to show you later, how heavy were they initially? You've got no tool marks on any of this stuff, just perfectly flat. And look at like the angle. It's not flat. This angle is different from the angles of these other steps. This is angled down. It's just such ridiculously perfect imperfection. It looks effortless because it's so perfect and so imperfect at the same time. How do you reconcile those two things without this just being an effortless activity that someone is just going around with a hot knife through butter? This is in Egypt. So, talking about geopolymers, this is granite in Egypt. Boy, oh boy, do these look like these blocks were soft at one point and were just being shoved together. And you have, spilling out. Like, look, you can see where one block was pressed into this and then a different angle and then a different block here. The granite just oozing out. You're telling me that's natural rock and traditional methods to shape this like that, and that's how they chose to leave it? Nah, man. No way, fellas. No way. You gotta be kidding me. No way. But this is Egypt. This is not Peru. I just wanted to show it because, look at it. Again, you look at the way this is done. You see this line here going across all of these blocks. This line going across these blocks here. How do you explain that? Like, even if you're dressing the stone, because this does look smoother, this looks flatter, but then why are you dressing the stone and leaving the nubs? If this is the finished state, what are these nubs for and why are they left? Right? And then if you are dressing the stone, like, why would you do it this way where you're coming halfway down a block at an angle, stopping? You leave that little portion of that one block there and then move on over and start going halfway down the other blocks. I don't know. It looks a lot like something was soft and pressed into there. More just inexplicable Hanan pacha style. How do you make sense of that? And is this destruction? Was there more to this? If there wasn't more to this, why are you carving these so precise and intricate patterns into like a destroyed boulder? It's rather confusing. But we look at, the limestone Hanan pacha, and I conclude that that destruction is recent. So is all of this destruction recent? Are there multiple different destructions going on? Right? This is obviously very intentional, but it also looks destroyed here. I don't know. Again, not a quarry. You can't cut a block out of there. That's impossible. This is not a quarry. Yeah, they were definitely playful. Scoop marks everywhere, right? So again, you have the ability to form these perfect rocks and get them perfectly fit together on the inside. So you make them perfectly smooth, airtight, but then you leave this as the finished outer surface. And here, I talked about how the windows appear like they are created top down. So you can even see in here, the top of that block is cut. There was an additional cut made into this block. Here's the line. It would be a 1/4 inch lower on here if you can make that out right there, right? They carved into the top of that block for the window to make it perfectly level. So they leveled these windows by the top. And then it seems that they were carved out after the wall is constructed. You can see that it's carved a little bit lower here, and it would have been leveled out eventually, but they didn't. Look at this. Look at this. There's a little crack, a little fissure running through this block. Okay, that's interesting. But then look at this shit right here. Look at that shit. And you got another little tiny nipple there. That tiny little nipple in between those two blocks, it has a tiny little crest there. But in a tiny little crest there, right? You could just flatten that. If you were doing this with traditional methods, you could just make that a flat surface. They didn't. You're telling me they carved that tiny little ridge into there, and we've seen from the blocks that are pulled apart that ridge runs all the way through the block. It's not just there on the surface. And then what is this? What is this? You have an imperfection in this block. This block cracks. A little chip pops out of the top there, right? This block cracks. A little chip pops out of the top. And then when they carved this block, they left that little chip to fill in that tiny, tiny little gap. Is that really what you're suggesting, mainstream archaeology? Fuck you. Go fuck yourself. That's bullshit. All right. I think that's my images. That's my images. I'm going to open up the phone lines. If anyone wants to call in, feel free to call in. Share your thoughts. Let me know what you guys think. Lines are open. Lines are open. I'm sure I wanted to cover so many things today. I'm sure I've forgotten several points that I wanted to make, and I'll remember them later. But I still feel like I put forward a pretty compelling case that the Sacsayhuaman rocks are geopolymer. At the very least, I'm not 100% convinced they are geopolymer. To be clear, I am not absolutely convinced they are, but I'm definitely not convinced that they're natural. I am not at all satisfied with the testing that was done to conclude that they're natural. I think we need to go back to what that other scientist said. We need to actually look at these under microscopes. We need to test these. We need to get to the bottom of this. I don't think that they have. So am I sitting here saying they're 100% geopolymer guaranteed? No, but we need to get to the bottom of that. I think it is my number one spot for geopolymer. If I were to pick one spot in the world and go, hey, if we test here, I think we'll find geopolymer, it's Sacsayhuaman. No one wants to call in? No one wants to share their thoughts? I've shared mine, so at this point, you're just staring at me on the screen unless you want to call in. I'm just giving you guys an opportunity to call in and share your thoughts if you want. Oh, the gnomes. I do have some more stuff to show, actually. So I'm going to keep showing stuff. You guys are still welcome to call in. Feel free to call in. I'll show these last few things because, yeah, I actually have something on the gnomes. This is just more for those people saying the blocks aren't perfect all the way through. You can see how deep this block is, and it is a watertight seal all the way through. That's several footage of blocks there. You tell me how many. That's full Stargate Voyager, right? His footage. But here we go. Look at that shit. Yeah, but they're only pressing the front faces. It's not actually impressive, right? There's so many detractors that will try and tell you that. So many. The tunnels, right? These brand new tunnels that were just revealed that were totally known about, fully known about. All right. This image here, you can't tell so much from this angle. This is sticking out at least 1.5 feet. These are huge nubs over here. This nub is massive. This nub is sticking out at least 1.5 feet. So it seems like a safe kind of assumption that the original rock that was quarried and hauled up this mountain also had 1.5 feet extra material on this surface. This stone here, I think, is about 150 tons, or maybe it's this one, whatever the biggest one is, right? Imagine if these stones had an extra 1.5 feet of material in all directions, in all dimensions, while it was being hauled up this mountain. I usually don't see an issue with big stones being moved. With a couple exceptions, I generally look at the ancient world and I look at the big stones and I go, yeah, it's leverage, it's mechanics, it's not magic, it's not this inexplicable thing. But when you talk about Peru specifically, we are talking about elevations over 5,000 feet in the air. And we are talking about slopes that are basically cliff faces. These aren't like gentle hills that you're walking up. They're cliffs that you're hauling these stones straight up mountainsides, 5,000 feet in the air, at minimum 150 tons, because that is the final weight of these stones. But I believe they were initially far heavier. I honestly don't know how we would do that today. How do we get a 150 ton stone, 150 ton stone, I don't know what just happened to me there, up a mountainside? I don't know. How do we get that 5,500 feet in the air? It would be a challenge today. How did Incas do it 500 years ago? Scoop marks, all just strange features here. More scoop marks. More scoop marks. Again, you're able to, do this with your stone, but then you leave like all these scoop marks and nubs. Even more just strange scoop marks here, highlighting all these scoop marks. Strange features, right? Oops, wrong button. I also wanted to shout out Weird Old World. This guy is pretty new to the scene. He just started YouTubing recently, and when I found him, I loved him. I was like, oh, this is great. Someone kind of like Wandering Wolf, who's just putting out really, really incredible footage of these megalithic sites in Peru, like way better footage than anyone else is putting out of them. And I thought he was worthy of a shout out for that. But he is doing so much more than just getting footage of this stuff. He is 3D modeling it. He's scanning it. He's doing some very, very impressive work. Go give Weird Old World a follow on Twitter and YouTube. Watch his videos. The dude's cool as hell. Again, this is not a quarry. You can't quarry out that stone. The whatever's there is lost. But also, why are you doing this there? This is just a square cut into an extremely eroded, very random chunk of bedrock. And if I recall, this is like kind of in the middle of nowhere, this feature. Like there's not a whole bunch of other stuff around it. Yeah, why are you doing that? What is that for? What is that for? Cave work, megalithic work inside of caves. More just strange features. More strange squares cut out. And again, it's so clean. The cuts are so clean. But with traditional methods, if this was done with a, hammer and chisel, they are just carving, like all of this material is destroyed. It's just being hammered and chiseled out. And they're carving this perfectly clean square cut into this extremely rough rock. And then you got some little upside down stairs there. So, I was talking about those other upside down stairs earlier, and I'm like, it sure looks like this block is upside down, but here's more upside down stairs that just make no sense. And again, look how clean and straight these are, but they're not 90-degree angles. They're like, the angles are wonky. It's totally wonky, but it's also totally precise. Look at how sharp those edges are. Very, very sharp edges, but just wonky angles. Just weird stuff. Little Tetris piece cut out. Why not? Little channel. That's been, these channels are all over, by the way. One of the scientists in Ancient Architects video highlights some of the channels in the limestone and highlights how the channel flows through multiple blocks, kind of like what I was showing you earlier on that wall, where it doesn't look like it's even like carved in. It just looks like someone pressed into, a soft material. I do recommend watching the full Ancient Architects video because it's just so well made. It's such a well made video. Even though I disagree with his final conclusion of the video, it is incredible research. It's incredible editing. It's incredible everything. It's a really well made video. Go watch his video and give it a like. Here's the gnomes. Guapa Iglesia. 3.5 feet tall. Full structures. These aren't just little dolmens. These are full structures. And there are elongated skulls. If you go listen to Brian Forrester, he'll tell you all about the elongated skulls. If anyone called in, I wasn't looking at this screen, so call in again if you want to. But yeah, that is all the content I have. I am now going to read through chat. I'm going to give you an opportunity to call in, but that's the end of the episode unless anyone wants to call in. Yes, and I absolutely agree with you, Rubate. Again, I don't think we're looking at one explanation. I don't think one thing explains everything we see in Peru. And even looking through it through like the mainstream lens, it doesn't seem, it's not explained through what, how do you explain those vitrified surfaces inside the cave through the mainstream lens? There is no explanation. It's not possible to be explained through there. So that vitrified surface obviously is different from the geopolymer that's being used in Sacsayhuaman. I think we're looking at multiple totally new ways of thinking that haven't been explored yet. And obviously geopolymer isn't like totally new, but it's new in the context of ancient history because it's just been a forbidden topic. But yeah, I think we're looking at very innovative people who discovered multiple different ways of manipulating rocks, and we have to really open up our ways of thinking. And I also agree with that. I think you're looking at multiple stages of civilization here. I think that the Hanan pacha very clearly being the oldest style, those just shaped mountains that you're talking about, because these other styles are built on top of that very often, so it inherently has to be the oldest. Yeah, I don't think that's from the Inca. I think that's from someone older. Hey, Yeah, and a lot of locals do. Like Ireland, they super duper believe in fairies and stuff like that. Yeah, I was getting close. I would have gotten there eventually. More gnomes, though, called Nuapa Machus. Okay, I'll look into that. Not aware. Yeah, I've heard that. And, especially with the tunnels, right? So there's rumors of tunnels, and there are tunnels, and you got these totally anomalous cuts in the mountain where the mountain is just shaped and it makes no sense. It makes no sense to us. It would have made no sense to the Spanish. You see buildings make sense. Those are buildings. You see walls make sense. Those are walls. You see these cuts into the mountainside and they make no sense. So you're hearing about tunnels, you're hearing about gold, you're looking at these strange mountainside cuts that make no sense. Yeah, if I was looking for treasure, I might go blow that up. I might go blow it up and try and find gold in there. Maybe. Yeah, I'm not actually a boomer. I have boomer tendencies with tech. Yes, and I covered that. If you watch the beginning of the video, if you go back to the ancient architects video in the description, I covered that, and that's the foundation of this video. They proved it was geopolymer with multiple different tests, very, very conclusively, in my opinion. Like, really, going back to, I actually think I might have skipped the conclusion from the ancient architects video, but they claim that the Rotadero formation is where these stones came from. So you have the lava coming up and melting the limestone, and then it reconglomerates and turns into this new limestone that's a microcrystalline structure. Okay, how are you explaining the conglomerate nature of the massive basal blocks? If that's the geological process, I'm not a geologist, so maybe there is an explanation here, but I'm not understanding it. How are you explaining that the conglomerate nature? How do you explain that? How do you explain the outer shell over top of the loose conglomerate through those geological processes? I don't think you can. And then also, why is there a distinct difference between the extra large blocks and the large blocks? The large blocks are consistent. There's no conglomerate nature of those blocks. How do you explain that through the natural geological processes that you're proposing? I don't think you do. And that's just one example. There's so many issues that were just glossed over because of a rock that was tested that might not have even been the bedrock. I don't know. I feel like the fact that we have proven that Sacsayhuaman is geopolymer through multiple different tests, I feel like that is a breakthrough. I feel like, you look at how Pumapunku's been tested, and they found organic material in that. That's dismissed. They're not geopolymer. They just go, nope, ignore that. You look at the multiple different tests in the Great Pyramid that have shown it's geopolymer. There have been tests that measured the magnetic makeup of the blocks. So even regular stone, because the Earth's magnetic field is this constant thing, it will align, even like the stone molecules magnetically. So they'll all be facing a certain direction. So when you cut a block, it has a magnetic field pointing in a certain direction. But when you make a geopolymer, it's all just mixed up into a slurry. There is no consistency to that magnetic field. So that was one of the tests they did. They found that there are some blocks that have a consistent magnetic field in the Great Pyramid and some that don't, clearly indicating geopolymer. They've done other tests on the Great Pyramid, totally separate methods that have also confirmed geopolymer. These are completely ignored and overwritten. So we already have the proof that this is geopolymer. It's already been proven by these scientists, but it's ignored and it's overwritten and overruled because of that one flimsy little test. So yes, I think we have proven geopolymer there. I am open to being disproven. I don't like to set my mind into stone because that leads to issues, right? But yeah, I'm pretty darn convinced it's geopolymer. But we do need further testing to really, really, really nail it in and make it unquestionable so that these experts can't dismiss it anymore. So yes, I would like more testing done. Exactly what that scientist was mentioning and suggesting, I think that's what needs to be done to absolutely, definitively, beyond any shadow of a doubt, prove that these are geopolymer. Again, I think that's already been done fairly well, but we could take it further. How do you call in? You use the link. I will repost the link. There's the link. Call in. Okay. Could be. I know that there definitely are figures like that. There's condor figures and puma figures and stuff. But all right, this is your last opportunity to call in. I'm giving you 1 minute to call. If you don't call, stream ends, and that's it. So thank you, everyone, for joining. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was informative. But yeah, if anyone wants to call in, you can. And if not, if you guys want an after show, I can, but since I've given like so much opportunity to call in here and no one has, I'm not going to do it unless someone specifically requests it. Because the after show would, again, just be an opportunity for you guys to call in. Maybe I could talk about the free solar panel scam, but all right. Thank you, fellas. Peace out, and I will catch you next week. Have a good one.